our neck out a little bit and said, well, here are some suggestions of what you might actually do going forward. And these are really indicative, they're really meant for discussion. So let me just quickly go through these for maybe a minute and a half, and then we'll sort of turn to the panel, who've been very patient so far. So what we suggest is that the plans should really be thought about as devices to emphasize what the National Action Plan on Climate Change calls a directional shift in development. What does that actually mean? How do you go about doing that? There is a time that will come for concrete actions, but maybe those concrete actions can wait a little bit until we have a clear sense of where we're going. So that directional shift is really important. And in order to do that, the first step might be having a conceptual framework that actually links sustainable development and climate resilience. So you don't have, as one person told us when we said, well, how do you decide what are priorities? And he said, well, we ocularly decide, which seemed to suggest that there wasn't really a framework there. The second sub-theme on this is that this slight confusion about whether or not the energy sector is part of the story, I think it's really important that we put aside. The energy sector has to be part of the story, otherwise you can't have a sensible discussion about sustainability. And there are issues around the politics of the global negotiations, but hopefully those can be managed, because this is really about a national discussion. And that's what we should be thinking about this. Those are the terms we should be thinking about this on. A third is that the process that we design, again, should not be aimed at getting actions as soon as possible. One state set a 3-month deadline because they really wanted to be first out of the blocks and get first to the donors. And you can't have a creative process and come up with new ideas in 3 months. It's simply not possible, and you certainly can't get outside voices. So design the process to emphasize that creativity. And a corollary of that is, of course, allow adequate time to do all that. So that's the first change in mindset. Really think about this process as bringing about that shift. How do we, how can we work towards a shift, and what is the direction that needs to be taken in key sectors? Second point, picking up on one of the findings that Anu talked about, is we have to improve the grounding in science. So states are at a loss as to think about this because there aren't downscale science predictions. If you don't have, at minimum, state-level predictions on climate science, here's what's going to happen in terms of rainfall patterns, in terms of temperature, in terms of health, in terms of various other things, you can't really have sensible climate planning. So then you will have sustainable development plans, which is not a bad thing, but it won't go that next stage to say, how do we rethink sustainable development in the context of likely climate impacts? And this is really something, in the brief you'll see that we've actually put sort of a center state donor in brackets by each of these recommendations to try and signal which set of actors we think should take the lead. And this is really something that has to happen at the central level. For each state to come up with climate science is not really feasible. The third point is designing the outcomes to better inform future action. And by this, what we mean is that you've got to think about the sequence of how these plans work. There has to be a process of visioning, followed by a process of sort of mid-level objectives, followed by concrete actions. Now, you're not going to achieve all of those in all sectors simultaneously. So it might be the case that for some states, they move further on issues that are more important locally. In other states, the process, in other sectors, the process is sequenced a little bit differently. And if you then want to boil down to actually doing something with these recommendations, there has to be a sensible basis for prioritizing them. You cannot have, as you currently have in, say, the state of Odisha, 300-odd recommendations in a long laundry list. You simply can't act on all of them. The state bureaucracy is going to get overwhelmed. You need to have a strategic sense of which of these are more important and how, and which are necessary preconditions to which other ones. There has to be a strategic sense to all of these. Karnataka, for example, boiled it down to 31, but they could not tell us the basis on which those 250-odd recommendations ended up being boiled down to 31. The filters were not clear. In other work that we've done, we've talked about a co-benefits approach to doing this, and there's a paper outside on that topic. That might be one kind of approach that one could think about. And finally, it's not clear how implementation will work. But what is clear is that if you have a nodal department sitting outside the main line departments, devising these plans, there's not going to be any ownership from the line departments. The line departments need to be in this process and ideally own it and actually come up with the ideas themselves with the nodal departments that are focused on climate change providing the kind of facilitation. And if we are going to have sensible numbers, there has to be a technique behind those numbers We can't just be seen both domestically as well as in terms of the international audience, to the extent this is important for that audience, be seen to be pulling numbers out of a hat. So those are the recommendations that we have on offer as a starting point for the discussion. I'll leave this up there because we have a website where all these the plan documents are, and the links to the original state plans. This will all be live tomorrow morning. So if you want to go back to the original source material, there are links to those plans, as well as some of the other literature, academic literature and other things that we've looked at to look at state planning in other countries. So feel free to go to that website tomorrow. I'll leave that up there, but maybe we can have the lights back on, and at long last, let me invite the panel to come up and join me. Okay, so if I could quickly introduce the panel, I'm going to introduce them in the order in which... Yes, I'm going to introduce the panel in the order in which they will speak, and there's a sort of a method to that as well. So first we have Ashish Kothari at the end of the panel there, who is the founder member of the Indian environmental group Kalpavriksha. He's also the founder of my interest in environmentalism, since we took a hike through the Omkareshwar Valley together many years ago. Ashish has taught at the Indian Institute of Public Administration, coordinated India's National Biodiversity Extraction and Action Plan process, and served on Greenpeace International and Greenpeace India boards. Ashish is also active in several civil society movements, and that's, I think, how a lot of people know his work. And he's also the author of a recent book, Churning the Earth, along with Asim Srivastav. Ashish also has some interesting work of his outside, and you're very welcome to pick up a copy of that on your way out. So Ashish is going to really talk about the bigger picture, this whole idea of rethinking development in his introductory comments in just a second. I'm just going to introduce all three of you and then turn to the panel. Leisha Narona, many of you in the scene in Delhi will know Leisha well. She's Executive Director at TERI and Director of the Resources Regulation and Global Security Division. She works on issues related to resources, environment, trade, and sustainable development, and also currently serves on the National Security Advisory Board of the Government of India. Leisha, actually very important, Leisha has served on several expert committees, notably the recent committee on the Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel, and on Goa's Vision 2035 document. So both sort of large conceptual thinking as well as detailed knowledge of the states. And I've asked Leisha to kick off with some comments on some of the issues around center-state relations when it comes to environmental management. And Mr. Alok Srivastav is the third person on the panel, and probably in some ways the most suited to this discussion, because Mr. Srivastav was in Madhya Pradesh when the climate plan was being formulated and was Principal Secretary to the government of Madhya Pradesh at the time, also Principal Secretary New and Renewable Energy Department, and currently is a Joint Secretary here at the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy at the Government of India. He's also worked for several years in the UNDP as well as the World Bank, so also brings a perspective on how donors engage with states. And so I think we'll be very well equipped to give us sort of disabuse of some of our fanciful notions and tell us how it actually works. So that's what we're looking to you for, sir. So maybe now I'll hand it over to each of you for maybe 5 minutes or so for a first round of comments, and then perhaps we can try and have a little bit more of a dialogue, picking up on some of the themes that you'll raise. So Ashish, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Navroz. Let me begin by confessing that I'm a complete climate novice. I have not been working on climate issues at all. And I have not read all the state action plans. In fact, I've not read any of them. So thanks for doing the job of actually distilling them. I'm going to make 5 quick points. The first one starts with I think the first point in your recommendations about a directional shift in development, and the idea that the climate action plans, both at the state and the national level, in fact, should or could be opportunities to actually move the direction in which development takes place and make it much more sustainable. I think given the fact that, I think this is crucial because we all are aware of the fact that India's, like everybody else's, development patterns are clearly unsustainable. We are on an ecological suicide path. And so therefore we need fundamental shifts in the models of development. It seems to me, however, that this is a lost opportunity right now, at least so far. Because much of what we see in the name of sustainable development is actually tinkering around within the current framework. It's not, for instance, challenging the completely mad and unthinking rush to growth. Growth has become an end in itself, regardless of how you do it. You see what's happening with Mr. Moily as Minister of Environment. Anything to do with any kind of growth, let it go, regardless of what happens to the environment or people. So challenging the growth fetish, I don't see that happening at all. Challenging the demand-led economy, whatever the energy demand, we need to find a way of producing it, which I think is again stupid. Challenging consumption patterns. All of us in this room, or at least most of us in this room, are probably overstraining the environment as far as our consumption patterns are concerned. I don't see almost any discussion within the climate discussions within India, or globally for that matter, on how can one actually create what I call a sustainable consumption line, so that nobody actually crosses that line, whether it's in terms of the water they consume, or the energy, or the food, or the materials, the minerals, etc., etc. We did a very rough back of the envelope calculation for the book that Navroz mentioned. And according to us, the richest people in India, which includes many of us in this room, have an ecological footprint which is something like 300 times that of the poor. Right? So I don't see discussions in the whole climate thing on the internal injustices of climate space, which needs to be there, and which relates to the last point on this, which is the inequalities, not just in terms of environmental impact, but inequalities in wealth, in power, and so on and so forth. So both sustainability and inequality in the current models of development have to be fundamentally challenged. The second major point which relates to this is, I think you've very clearly pointed out that mitigation is very inadequately dealt with there's much more on adaptation, much less on mitigation. And I think one cannot discuss mitigation unless we also go into these issues of what really is development and consumption and so on and so forth. So I find that the plans have a few things like technical fixes and financial fixes. Some examples were given by Anu. But they don't really go beyond the technical and the financial into, again, more fundamental issues of social, cultural demand and consumption and so on. Third main point, you have very rightly said that the plans need to be far more science-based. But I think that's inadequate, Navroz. I think they need to be knowledge-based. The knowledge is not only science. So for instance, let me just give you one quick example that I learned just a week back. Mr. Ganesh Devi, some of you may have heard of his name. He just completed India's largest language survey. According to him, in Himachal, local people have 220 different terms for snow. 220 terms just for snow. Now he said, if we have to tackle, say, glacier melt or other issues of what's happening up in Himachal, that language and the knowledge that goes behind that language is as crucial as a scientist going from here and learning and studying what's happening to the glaciers. Those knowledge systems are fast disappearing, but none of us in our action plans actually try and build local, traditional community knowledge. And I would say that please replace the word science with knowledge. So that relates to the fourth and second last point, which is in terms of the process of building any of these action plans. I think you mentioned that Madhya Pradesh had a series of consultations, including with farmers. But other than that, I have not found any process by which communities, urban and rural, are actually involved. Experts are not only those of us who are sitting in this room. Those people who created 220 terms for snow are also experts, right? So if we're talking about the way we did the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, we took 4 years to actually consult several tens of thousands of people, including those who we consider to be illiterate, ignorant, etc., etc. I think they have things to add. The climate action plans need also to be done in this manner. And if you build that kind of process, you build the buy-in for the implementation. Otherwise, implementation remains at the level of the departments. And as long as it remains at the level of departments, you will always, for 50 years we've had this problem that departments work in silo. It will keep happening unless and except where a village like Mendhalekha in Maharashtra says, when the departments come to them, they say, sorry, all departments come together. We as a Gram Sabha will decide and put and integrate all the plans for our village. That's how actually governance needs to work. And I think both in your critique and of course in the state action plan, those aspects of direct democracy and governance are weak or are missing and have to be there. And the last point here is that I think you've noted that individually a number of officers in the states have brought in some transformational aspects. Sikkim keeps coming up, I'm sure that's Sandeep Tambe, and there are other officials like that. But to go beyond that into making those transformational actions systemic, you need to again look at what are people doing already to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. And I'm talking about real grassroots stuff that's happening out there. Let me just give you one example and I'll shut up after that. Dalit women farmers, small farmers, half an acre, 1 acre, 1.5 acres, in 70 villages in Zahirabad, Medak district of Andhra Pradesh, have completely transformed their agricultural system from being unsustainable to totally sustainable, dry land, organic, millets based, built it into the local economy, linked it up to the their own public distribution system, etc., etc. To me, of course, that's a local environmental social transformation. It's also a climate transformation. They are climatically far more sustainable than a green revolution farmer in their own neighborhood. And it seems to be that unless the states actually start looking at these already live examples and learning from them and building them into the plans, we will remain dependent on a few far-thinking officials in a few departments putting in the odd transformational action here or there. So 5 points. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ashish. It's a wonderful set of points to kickstart this discussion, and ranging from sort of the very big picture to very concrete examples and very concrete suggestions. Teja, maybe I can turn it over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Navroz. Navroz asked me to speak about what does this mean for federalism and also on mitigation issues. But just before that, I'd like to go back to the point that he made about climate change and sustainable development. To my mind, there is no either or. I think these two are absolutely, they need to go together. This thing that sustainable development is about today and climate change is something outside is not, it cannot be supported. Because if you think about sustainable development, you're looking at human well-being without affecting the ecosystems over time. You're looking at agents, you're looking at over time, and you're looking at spatial issues. You need to do the same to climate change plans. The only difference is that the climate change is an external stressor. Sustainable or development creates internal stressors, as Ashish just mentioned. And those internal stressors, either we can prevent them, or we need to do away with them, or we need to mitigate them if they have to be there. Climate change is a little beyond our, at least for now, it's beyond our ability to cope with it because it's already there. We're locked into climate change. Whatever we do about mitigation, some amount of impact's already going to happen, and therefore we need that adaptation. But these are external stressors. And so whether you look at these external stresses or you look at internal stresses, these are all part of sustainable development. So I would not make any differentiation between them. Now, yes, we need to bring science into it. Yes, we need to bring other knowledges into it, absolutely. In fact, one of the things that we've been doing are these environmental governance workshops in different parts of India, using an ecosystem basis. We've gone to the Himalayas to look at mountain ecosystems. We've gone to the deserts. We've gone to the coasts. And very recently, we did it in Bangalore to look at the plateaus. And everywhere, the climate change, the discussion around climate change was about the fingerprint of climate change that was already happening, which was being noticed by NGOs, civil society groups, and local people, which was not captured by the so-called expert groups. And there was already a response happening, which again was not captured by the scientists. And therefore, we need to bring together these two groups in order to be able to come up with better knowledge on this issue. About the other point that you made about sustainable consumption production, I completely agree with you. That's key. You will not have so much of climate change impact if you had been more sustainable in your consumption of energy. And that links back to this whole mitigation question and something very dear to Navroz's heart, which is you need to do something about energy, whether it is using of renewable energy and energy efficiency, and I'm sure Alok's going to be talking about that. So I'm not going to get into much detail. But to my mind, I think we need to separate what we discuss internationally and what we discuss domestically. And domestically, we really need to look at energy justice. We need to look at energy equality. We need to figure out what is it that we can do to bring about the best kinds of energy solutions. And I think decentralized energy solutions is one important idea, not only from a strategic point of view, that you're reducing your fossil fuel use, you're reducing the carbon footprint, you're reducing possible terrorist attacks because you do not get rid of a huge unit. So there are a whole lot of very clear strategic reasons why we can make a case for moving outside of the fossil fuels into renewable energy. And again, I'll leave that to you. But I think that we can separate the two discussions, and you did mention that in your presentation. We do not have to talk about what we do domestically, internationally. About the need for coming up with greenhouse gas inventories, I'm not sure how central it